Thanks so much for inviting me. My name is Himanshu Dab, professor of law at New York Law School. It's really a pleasure to be here with at Dev BootCamp, with legal hackers, and the rest of the panel as well, and to see one of my former students front row in the audience, just like he was in class every day. Yeah, here we go again. But I'll just go ahead and let the excellent panelists introduce themselves.
I'm Greg Exathalis. I'm counsel at the law firm of K. Scholler LLP. I'm actually an ETF or investment management lawyer by trade. I came to be introduced into this field in the public conscious by the 2011 Wired article, and in the professional context in relation to the first Bitcoin ETF, which is in registration, and that's all I can say about that. And beyond that, I now represent about 10 clients in the space and have taken on a variety of pro bono projects as well that really run the entire range of Bitcoin as an ecosystem, from the idea of it as an asset in financial services, or as a technology or payment system, or as a blockchain technology that has the ability to really impact the way the world operates on a computer science or informational technology level, rather than what the popular media normally thinks about in tabloiding Bitcoin. So thrilled to be here and look forward to the talk.
Hi, I'm Carol Spawn-Desmond, though I'm currently an attorney at Credit Suisse. I, for several years, headed up the investment advisory and fund practice at Satterley, Stevens, Burke & Burke. My experience also was in working with groups and developers seeking to either have funds that offered Bitcoin investment strategies. Unfortunately, they couldn't quite get off the ground, or also licensing arrangements, tech app designers and the like, and worked very closely in the technology space for coders and designers and website developers and the like. So I'd been working with Bitcoins for quite a long time, and speak about it quite frequently, but with its parallel source of anonymous currency, and that would be cash.
Hello, my name is Jay Hack. Yes, that is actually my last name. It does cause me no end of difficulty when signing up for computer accounts. I am a... Yes. I used to be hacker at AOL.com, but that was before some of you were born. I gave that account up over 25 years ago. I am a partner in the firm of Gallat Dreyer and Berkey in White Plain. In Midtown. I have been practicing banking law for 39 years. I represent the evil empire. I have represented, from time to time over the last 49 years, I have represented virtually every member of the evil empire. I am the past chair of the business law section of the New York State Bar Association, and how do we put this politely? Okay, we'll stay in. Should I read in my button? This button? No, we're going to skip that. Okay, my simple approach to Bitcoins starts with the idea that everybody who is involved in the process of clearing Bitcoins should be arrested and thrown in jail for being involved in a massive collective criminal conspiracy. And if anybody has any doubts about that, if you don't know what happened to the hospital out in LA 2 weeks ago, which got a crypto locker software on their server and had to pay $17,000 in extortion to get the key to unlock their computer server. And how did they have to pay it? Bitcoin.
Okay.
Because I want to make it clear, this is my prop. Okay, I happen to also be a wine collector. My view is that Bitcoin and blockchain technology are entirely independent. If we want to talk about the value of blockchain technology, that's fine. I know a lot of people who run the high-end wineries in California. This happens not to be one of them. And blockchain technology has a phenomenal value in avoiding counterfeiting in wine and probably counterfeiting in a lot of other things I haven't really thought about. I think wine is particularly good because the volume of individual bottles and the fungibility of the bottles works quite well with it. But in my view, any argument regarding Bitcoin that says, well, blockchain technology is really good misses the point because they have to be decoupled.
Okay, great. And
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And we'll certainly get to the more policy-oriented issues. But maybe we could first start at the basics. I suspect people here have a wide variety of backgrounds, maybe leaning towards the technical. And maybe, Greg, you could just walk us through what is Bitcoin, how does it work, and what are the unique aspects of the transactions?
Well, I think, first I'll do a plug for, we've got a primer in the back that we've produced over at K-Scholler, which I think gives a pretty good overview and introduction to Bitcoin as well as blockchain technology. It is, one of those. It is very complex, and I think you have to stay a little bit out of the rabbit hole if we want to keep this under 9 or 10 hours. So, and also I don't know if, I know we have beer and some water, but I don't know if we have Excedrin, and some of those rabbit holes get quite deep. So what is Bitcoin itself? Really, you have to think about it in three ways. There is what we all think of as Bitcoin, an anonymous cryptocurrency, except it's not really anonymous, and it's also not really a currency. That is what we like to call little b Bitcoin, the asset. That is a non-counterfeitable and cryptographically verifiable asset or piece of information that can be transferred from one person to another through what we like to call big B Bitcoin, which is the network or software on which Bitcoin's payment processing system runs. So that's big B Bitcoin and little b Bitcoin, and that's a difficult distinction to draw when you're publishing a 90-page prospectus and then you realize you didn't have it right the first way. But the third element, so you've got big B Bitcoin, little b Bitcoin. The third element is blockchain, which is really the larger scale technological innovation that was foisted out onto the public in 2009 when Satoshi launched the Bitcoin network. Actually, November 2008 was when he published the white paper. Satoshi is a pseudonym for whoever published the white paper, whether it's an individual or a group, despite what Newsweek and others would have you believe. It's not been determined who it is. Blockchain technology is at its heart computer science and information technology, and it's a breakthrough in how information can be shared, verified, and stored across space and time that in many ways has significant improvements over the existing server database-centric system that is used. It involves essentially a shared ledger, often called a distributed ledger, and the ability to add information and verify information on that shared ledger, and at the same time store it locally among all users who are accessing and relying on it.
Couldn't that be an area where there's a potential weakness for hacking as well? In the sense that if you're dealing with the algorithmic hash families, that there could be weaknesses? Has that been addressed in any way?
Well, there are weaknesses with respect to the technology, and I guess probably best is to address it in the context of Bitcoin itself rather than getting into the idea of alternate ledgers, alternate blockchains, and private or public blockchains. But when you're looking at Bitcoin itself, which is currently the largest computer network the world's ever known by a tremendous amount when it comes to electricity expending, as well as hashing power, which that's kind of a cute thing to say. It's the most powerful computer network because it's a computer network which is built for one purpose and can only work Bitcoin. It can't be used to play Sudoku or anything like that.
But despite its being so large, it has been susceptible to over-control.
Well,
and the Armageddon effect, that just was an experience that could have potentially brought down the value, if you will, of Bitcoins.
Yeah, and I would say that Bitcoin thus far has proved remarkably resilient with respect to actual hacking, but also is potentially remarkably fragile when it comes to temporary breakage.
Well, yeah, and what I was thinking of is the fact that, I don't know if you all know, is the 51% control of the blockchain in the Bitcoin, large B, space means that you get to control, you're trying to get this, you're trying to wrest it from me. You get to control or reject a transaction being approved or verified. Now, that happened recently, and one of the fears is that, for example, with Goldman Sachs controlling and owning and giving all the money to the major miners, that same control could still exist. Do you think it's susceptible to insider trading as well? In the sense that even though you have all of these quote-unquote nodes of miners that allegedly aren't
A cabal.
yeah, exactly. What's to stop them from taking a kickback with respect to mining and approving, and then hiding their real 51% control?
Well, I think that brings up sort of an important topic. And who here has a level of familiarity with the technology itself behind Bitcoin? Maybe a show of hands. All right. So basically, one of the elements of this blockchain technology, it's applicable to the big B Bitcoin, is the way you know information that's added to the ledger is valid and accurate is it goes through a process where, okay, if I were to get out my wallet on my phone and send him on a transaction right now, what I would do is I would broadcast that transaction through peer-to-peer connections that use something called the gossip protocols. If anyone downloaded anything or doesn't want to admit they downloaded anything off of Napster, that was somewhat similar. You're peer-to-peer connecting to others and sharing information amongst each other on a continuous basis. So when I send out that transaction, what I do is from my phone, I broadcast it to the network through a peer-to-peer connection. Eventually, it will reach the hands of someone we call a miner after going through a variety of people. Usually this happens in a matter of just a couple of seconds. And then the miner is doing what really ultimately is validation and clearance of transactions and adding them in a controlled and verifiable way to the blockchain, which is the distributed ledger. So that verification process is what you're talking about, is that you can have a corruption or a cabal on either the nodes, which is the people who are passing it information from one user to another, or through the miners. Now it's important.
And also the approval. Who gets to that? It's a communal, as all you well know if you've read the most basic thing about Bitcoin. It's a communal decision, and you can have the community reject the verification. It could be a fraudulent rejection, but then you get into what Mr. Hack here has been talking about. Isn't it an unnecessary structure that pretends to be leveling and useful? But Jay, wouldn't you say that if it's susceptible to that sort of fraud and interaction, it might have no advantages over anything like a current bank or inside trading might have?
Well, I'm waiting to hear what the advantages are beyond. It's kind of a neat idea, and wow, we're smart and we came up with this really good software and it accomplishes something, but whether it accomplishes something which has any social utility is a more interesting question. But I mean, my issue for the miners is, and we have this large group of people, and they're all volunteers. They're uncompensated volunteers. How are they compensated?
They earn Bitcoin.
Right, exactly. Okay, so it's an inherently. I haven't decided whether the word inflation or deflation is the right word, because it's the opposite of the way we normally think about it. But if there's no speculative value to a Bitcoin, and I own a Bitcoin, and there are all of these additional transactions, and miners earn Bitcoins as a result of those transactions, in theory, the value of my Bitcoin will go down.
Yeah, that's right for the period we're in right now.
Yeah. So therefore, there is. I mean, everybody's arguing. Not everybody. A lot of people take the position that Bitcoins have no. That a Bitcoin transaction has no cost. What I wanted to do was have a little sign here with a wooden thing and hold it up. And when people made certain arguments, that being one of them, it just said bullshit on it, because I call bullshit on. The most common argument I hear is that Bitcoin transactions are free, and they're not free. They're in addition to the fact that they take advantage of the fact that the internet is a subsidized network that somebody has to pay for, it does, I guess depreciate is a better word than it depreciates.
So, and that goes to how Bitcoins enter existence. And it goes towards the idea that this process there is an economic incentive in theory that miners are incented to act honestly and clear transactions that they receive. And that incentive is built upon the way new Bitcoins enter the system, as well as the idea of transaction fees. So you're right that most Bitcoin transactions aren't free. Right now, currently, the default transaction fee that I would be attaching to the Bitcoins I'm sending to Iman is 0.001 Bitcoin, which is more or less 4 cents. And, that's not a free transaction. At the same time, when the U.S. Marshals Service sold 30 million Bitcoins to, I think I know who it was, but I don't know if it's public, so I'm not going to say. They sent $30 million in one transaction to an address, $30 million worth of Bitcoin, in one transaction to the winner of their auction, and they didn't attach a fee to it. And sure enough, within 8 minutes, that transaction had gone through with no fee for the sending of $30 million, which is a pretty remarkable idea that you had a peer-to-peer transaction of that scale and
But
scope.
what do you want to say about that 10 minutes, though, when you think about the
Well,
concept?
it's not instantaneous.
Yes, it's not. And I remember dealing back with Bitcoins in their infancy, and the idea was, well, it was an instantaneous transaction. But now I've got the numbers here, 15.2 million in circulation. It was funny, within a year's time from the last time the Government Accounting Office ran the numbers, it was an average of 65,000 transactions on average per day.
65,000 Bitcoin transactions?
No, 1,000, yeah. So, and compared with 44 million run through the Fed. But
Great. So certainly I think we realize that in the simplistic world, Bitcoin is free and it's instantaneous, but it's actually not. I think we can get beyond those sort of false observations of it, but I don't know if that diminishes whether or not it has value. But let's go to the next step then and talk about why, and go just stay on technology a little bit, and then we'll get to law and regulation. Why does it take so long? How does this blockchain process work? And what does that mean also for a recently publicized New York Times article about this debate about the block size, the 1 megabyte block size about Bitcoin, and the tumult that's going on in the open source community?
no, wait, before you get started, because I know you're going to speak more, I just want to lay the reality. No, I just want to lay the reality out for them. I want each of you, when he's going to speak, to think to yourself and why there's time involved with this and all that. Any of you that's ever had an RSA key and ever had to use it and see it run through those numbers, right, just for your one transaction of it, which might be to stick it into your computer and use it as a code to access something. So think about how long that takes. Mm-hmm. And now we're talking about something far more complex.
So on the technology side, it is complex. It's built into the software. What happens is I broadcast my transaction out there. It reaches a miner, which again is a validator and a clearer. What the miner does is they are fighting to solve a cryptographic problem, which is somewhat of a nonsensical thing, but it must result in an answer that has a certain number of zeros in front of the solution.
It's not nonsensical. Now stop it. It's not. That's a mean thing to say about those algorithmic hash families. There's been a lot of work over the years that's done that.
We all love elliptical curve cryptography.
Yeah, because what they are is there are protocols and that relate to the message that's being sent. It might be a message that relates to your particular bitcoins, the transaction involved, time, date, stamp. There are a multiplicity of items that go into this equation, to which very specific protocol, algorithmic determinations have been made so that each of them can readily be shortened can be transformed into a matchable transaction. So it makes a lot of sense. It's highly complex, but it's not, I take umbrage with what you said, because that's what makes it all workable. And
No, and that's true, but from the lay perspective, I think with respect to the mining equation that's being solved, I think we can think about it as you're expending computing power using a specific program seeking to solve a cryptographic problem, which in the end game, it really amounts to you're expending electricity, and the more electricity and computational power you expend, you're receiving more lotto entries into a Powerball entry that if you win that lotto, you have earned the right to collect all of the uncleared transactions that you have and include them in something that's called a block, which is appended to the end of the blockchain, which is literally a chain of blocks, each block linking to the prior block and each block linking to the next block. And inside that block, you have an amount of data which includes a timestamp. It includes the transactions with digital signature verification that validates that each of those transactions is authentic. It includes information that can be appended to a transaction in a memo field, so you can embed additional information in there. And it also includes the economic reward for having successfully solved the block, which is called currently the Coinbase, and it's currently about 25 Bitcoins, which there's got to be someone in the room better than me at math, but that's what, about 10 grand? Or 1 grand? One or the other. I think it's 10 grand.
But I was going to say, isn't that when you say you embed these things, isn't that where its weakness lies? That's one question. You could embed things that might cause it to, say, lose the unique identifiers. Let's say that your unique identifiers for any given transaction might be your time date stamp and the item to which the transaction applies. And if you're able to apply a virus that wipes out the time date stamp and then gives a constant for the item to which the transaction applies, doesn't that now mean you have a collision? A collision of your two, what a collision is in the hash world is that when you have a transaction that had occurred and another one that supposedly would have collided with it, and then it doesn't get registered. It looks like it's a new transaction.
You mean like a double spend?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is that something, like when you talk about embedding, isn't that where there can be problems or weaknesses?
Well, I think when you talk about stuff like embedding, it really gets to the fact that Bitcoin is ultimately computer technology, and therefore the technology itself, the cryptography around it, can only be as secure as the people who are using it. So one of the issues with double spending is the idea of waiting for what's called the confirmation protocol, which, depending on who you ask, it's either waiting for your transaction to have been included in a block and 5 subsequent blocks or 9 subsequent blocks, and dealing with that as what we would call a confirmed transaction, versus someone who, if I send him on the transaction, within a matter of a couple of seconds, he's going to see that transaction on the network, but it's not going to be confirmed. Now, if I were to somehow quickly send another transaction, or thanks to our good friend Peter Todd, a replace by fee transaction, I could do something like a double spend, but there are procedures which again go against the idea of this being an instantaneous payment system. But there are procedures in place where you can operate and use Bitcoin in a way that is more secure. And this again also goes to the idea of Bitcoin as anonymous or pseudonymous, where it's not really anonymous, but it can be used in a way to make oneself virtually anonymous.
And also, though, isn't that an advantage to get to what Mr. Hack was saying with his friend? I don't want to put Mr. Brisson of Santa Ynez Valley down. I think they're probably a very fine vineyard. But isn't that where you could have a blockchain filled with all of these algorithmic hash identifiers that could so protect every single bottle from every single year and every single cask, so that you're not going to have counterfeit wine?
As I said, blockchain technology has to be decoupled. The concept of cryptographic blockchain technology needs to be decoupled from the concept of cryptocurrency. I have not heard, and I have been trying since Carol was nice enough to rope me into this, to find some sort of value to Bitcoins. And I have discussed this with probably about 40 people, including general counsel of some of the largest banks in the entire world. So far, I have gotten two arguments that I think are not dismissible out of hand, although one of them I think is dismissible by the time you get to your second hand. One of them, which I think is the only one that I find legitimate, is that what is illegal in the United States may be what is lawful in the United States may be illegal in another country, and we as a society may decide that we want to facilitate somebody else breaking. The easiest example would be currency export laws, because we don't have them. But let's say it's a guy moving money in order to rally people at Tiananmen Square in China. Maybe we decide that that's a socially acceptable way to socially acceptable act, and we should allow a method of paying for that anonymously. Okay, I'll give you that one. Outside breaking laws in other countries and facilitating the breaking of laws in other countries that we don't like, the laws as well as the countries. Okay, I'll give you that one. The other one is, well, you can use it for micro payments. You can use it. The poor guy in Calcutta who can't get any fresh water can buy fresh water for a penny using a Bitcoin, and there's no practical way for him to spend a penny in rupees. And my response to that is, yeah. The guy who lives in the shack in Calcutta with the corrugated steel roof goes in there, opens his laptop, signs on to the internet, and pays a penny in Bitcoins. So, nah. So if we're talking about Bitcoins, all right, even if we assume you said instantaneous is not correct, and I agree. I think instantaneous comes from too many people whose parents read Dr. Spock and thought that instantaneous gratification was an important psychological goal. But even if it is instantaneous, my response is, so what? I need to be able to pay now rather than in 5 minutes. And this is really, and show me. Give me something useful. Does anybody out there own any Bitcoins?
You're really not qualified to speak about this. I feel really awful to hear everything you just said. It's painful to anybody understand really Bitcoin and the future of this technology. And I'm sure you're a great lawyer.
Which technology, the cryptocurrency or the blockchain?
I'm sure you're fantastic attorney. You've probably never been to the developing country. You don't understand the disruptive power of this technology can have. And in regards to your last comment about how somebody who lives in a slum in Calcutta will not benefit from this technology.
How would they benefit?
It's completely
make a substantive argument. I won't accept. I'm wrong. I will accept the substantive argument I've been looking for.
I actually know several startups that are actively using Bitcoin
for what?
to empower people in developing country to either receive money or transact. And the fact that right now we have billions of people that are completely shut out from the capitalist economy, where they cannot transact, and for the first time in human history, we can bypass the problem that there are no retail banks in rural Nigeria, and we can now have the possibility to allow people with a simple smartphone to be able to transact on a different level, in different levels. Now, I understand that for all of us, we have Metro cards and we have credit cards. All of us, it's very easy. We collect miles, every time we swipe our card. So we don't have there's the pain point that neither you or your kids will ever experience. But for somebody, I actually been to India over 20 times. I've been to Calcutta, I've been to the slums. I can tell you that it is a real use case. And if you be a little bit more adjourned on the issue, there are like $2 smartphones that's being distributed right now, right? So we all like read TechCrunch. We know about the $3 smartphone. These are incredible time. Bitcoin is like really changing the world. And I just want to like make clear that let's not make dismissive arguments saying, oh, I spoke to 40 counselors and they don't know the use case of Bitcoin. Those 40 counselors don't know anything about Bitcoin.
What I do think you raise an incredibly important point, which does go to the answer of use cases, because when you're talking about Bitcoin as a payment system, when you're looking at it from a first world perspective, it's not nearly as transformative a technology as can apply in the third world. Take, for example, Africa, where 80% of the population doesn't have access to financial services. Now, right now, if you ask me today, can Bitcoin provide them access to financial services? No, it's too early in its existence. There aren't established markets in which it can actually operate. But in the future, you can see the technology and perhaps even Bitcoin itself as having a transformative impact in opening up financial services, not traditional financial services, but opening up financial services to people in those industries. And if you're looking for an example that can show that there is potentially some applicability there, M-Pesa is the perfect example, where in Kenya, 60% of all transactions that are commercial that take place in Kenya right now are cell phone minutes that occur when one person with a Nokia brick smartphone SMSs a certain amount of airtime to another person with a Nokia brick cell phone. Now, those cell phones that they have largely right now couldn't support Bitcoin. But move 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, smartphones are going to be everywhere. Smartphones virtually are everywhere currently.
But what you're talking about then is and this is what I agree that there needs to be a system to allow people in, call them second, third, whatever world you want to, whatever, I hate to say pejorative term you want to use for people in other countries. I agree. There needs to be a system to allow them to engage in financial transactions. And the technology to allow them to engage in financial transactions is valuable. And it's evolution. If you think about it, most of the people here are too young, but I mean, I can now go to not every place in the world, but I can travel to most of the world, certainly to large cities throughout most of the world, and take a little plastic card and shove it into a machine and get money out. Believe me, when I was 16 years old, if I had to carry a wad of cash because that was it. They certainly wouldn't take my check, credit cards. That was ridiculous. So there's nothing. I don't have any problem with the idea of establishing a methodology for inexpensive, small amount financial transactions. My problem is doing so through a system that is designed originally for anonymity. It's cryptographic and
it's incorrect. It's completely incorrect.
What's incorrect?
It was not designed for anonymity. It's pseudonymous. It is the wallet could be anonymous, but like the moment you can actually trace the transaction throughout the blockchain, and this is actually a far superior way to trace transaction than cash, which is the ultimate anonymous way of transaction.
If I want to know who got I think it was 400 Bitcoins that were paid by the hospital in Los Angeles on the 17th of February to unlock their server from the malware that was installed on their server. Can I find out?
You will be able to find out the wallet. Of course, you will be able to trace that Bitcoin to a specific wallet. Now, you will not be able to, if the wallet has to be associated with a gateway to extract the money out. You can trace all the Bitcoin throughout the blockchain. You will not be able, in some cases, if the Bitcoin remain in a specific wallet, to associate that Bitcoin to a specific person. But you can still trace all the transactions throughout the blockchain. And in any case, there's always been uses of where money laundering occurs every day. Actually, if anything, Bitcoin makes it a lot harder because you will be able to. I mean, look, we have a. I don't want to take it from the panel, but I think the gentleman on the panel will answer the question better than me.
Well, I think this is why it's a good segue to the regulation part now, which is what.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate everything. I think it's a good discussion, important discussion to have. So as a way maybe to circle back eventually to the ransom issue and other problematic and challenges for cryptocurrencies, let's talk about regulation, including, let's say you're a hypothetical company, you have a startup. What regulations apply to Bitcoin transactions that people need to know about?
Well, in New York or outside New York? That's a problem.
Whatever you want to answer. But let's just say, as attorneys, not judging the propriety of something, let's just explain as an educational matter first what applies, then we can debate whether it's good or bad.
Well, when you think that there are several places where Bitcoins and the laws intersect, you have users, you have miners, you have the payor. That's the one responsible. You have the exchange, and each of those spaces intersects. Your user can use it, in the United States at least, use Bitcoins freely. You know, they don't have necessarily a problem. They're going to be going in and purchasing them in a certain way. And actually, there have been this gentleman mentioned the wallet. And only recently, in fact, that there have been regulations that relate to those wallet providers to make sure that they have the regulations to ensure there is no true anonymity in that respect. So if you got to talk about the exchanges, and I know you're dying to talk. Okay, no, you can go. I see you were ready. I did not take that away from you.
So in New York, the Department of Financial Services, formerly known as the Banking Department, but that's another story, created regulations requiring licensing of Bitcoin businesses. Now, so the question presented is, what business activities have to be licensed? Now, the first component of the regulation is the defined term is virtual currency business activity. But the first phrase in the regulation establishes, how many people here are lawyers? I just want to, from a terminology standpoint. Okay. The first component of the regulation establishes what we would call the jurisdictional scope. In other words, who is covered by it? And the answer is any business that does certain activities which is conducted and involves the state of New York or a New York resident. Someone earlier commented that on one website it said we will not do business if you live in North Korea, Iran, Iraq, or New York State. The person who wrote the website obviously knew what the New York rule said. And the New York regulators are famous for attempting to extend the jurisdictional scope of their rules. And here they've said any activity involving New York or a New York resident, considering that New York is one of the half a dozen, to be liberal, financial capitals of the world, a lot of this is going to involve New York. So then what is it? Transmitting virtual currencies, storing virtual currencies, buying and selling virtual currency as a customer business. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think it means, being like an exchange or being a dealer in this traditional term of a dealer as opposed to a broker, performing exchange services, or controlling, administering, or issuing a virtual currency. So that, I guess that includes miners and...
Well, no, actually, that really is more looking at the e-gold Liberty Reserve type of circumstance. And, I think one of the things that's important to note is, this technology is without borders, but law and regulation is decidedly so. So when you are operating a Bitcoin business, if you're going to operate and knowingly operate in jurisdictions around the globe, you have to understand what the regulatory impact in those jurisdictions are. And for the most part, as remarkable as it seems, given how in the life of Bitcoin, it seems like it's been slow to develop. The United States has actually been quite quick with Bitcoin regulation, and that has been mirrored in some cases around the globe where countries seem to be moving more in the direction of the U.S., and in others it simply has been shaken off as something that's not worthy of attention at this point, or in a handful of jurisdictions, most notably Iceland and Russia, and to a lesser extent China, and capital controls perhaps have contributed to some decisions that have been more heavy-handed, although often those are not really fully understood or fully fleshed out. In the case of Iceland, you're not allowed to convert Bitcoins into a fiat currency or vice versa, although you can mine Bitcoins, which is remarkable.
Well, that's why they're popular, mining in Iceland. And that's another interesting thing to make it clear is we talk about Bitcoins in a currency type of way, but they are not a currency. And they are not regulated here, at least until the CFTC starts doing something. Certainly, the Fed has said they have no interest in Bitcoins, nor should they. And instead, what they're treated as, we regulate them as exchanges because you're taking something of value and converting it. And that's a very regulated sphere, as well as the fact that AML and OFAC are going to apply. And that's what the license, for example, in New York State does.
So I think that maybe it's worthwhile to talk about the jurisdictional calendar of how things really came out with Bitcoin, which started in March of 2013 with FinCEN, which focused on it being something akin to a money service business, which is more familiarly a money transmitter. So if you think of money transmitting licensing, the similar framework
Western Union.
Yeah,
right.
The similar framework that applies to Western Union would apply to an exchange seeking to operate in a state. But that's not only on a federal level with registration with FinCEN, but it's also then looking at all 50 states and territories and their individual state regulations.
Right, exactly. And that's why the license in New York comes into play, which again reiterates the AML and OFAC. But again, those are just some of the things that apply. When you have a fund that might be interested in issuing Bitcoins, you might have, you've been involved with that, holding them and all of that, is the SEC is going to get you, not necessarily because they are security. I believe the more you're utilizing, for example, Overstock.com has a registration statement on file, and I think it went live, didn't it? Yeah. It went live yesterday. With respect to that and the ability it has to utilize blockchains for securities purposes, it's basically having a digital type of currency, digital type of security. That's a security. And that's a blockchain security. However, the SEC is going to get you, even outside of that, with disclosure laws. Because, and this is a very famous case in Texas, if I remember, where it was a fund that was seeking investors, and you had payments involving Bitcoins, and they made no disclosure with respect to the fact that Bitcoins are highly volatile. And they can range from a high, during the course of their life, the low, of course, when they started with, a high of 1,200 some odd dollars per Bitcoin, and then now they're settled around 450, 460. And
that was the oil contract case,
yes,
that one.
Yeah.
And then there was also the Shavers case, which was also in Texas, which taking you through again the timeline of it. If we look at 2013 as a focus on money transmission law applying to Bitcoin, and that's really where the high compliance and high cost of regulation comes in.
But that's been a constant, though.
That's been a constant.
It's constant. In 2014, you had the two cases where they had to iterate that point again to make it clear. And then in 2015, they just recently had another case to make it clear exactly what they mean about that.
Yeah. And then in February of 2014, you had the IRS chime in on a different part.
It's property.
It's property, and it's treated as property, and transactions are barter.
And then we'll add the question of whether it really fits. In my view, very, very carefully and precisely within the definition of the term commodity under the Commodity Futures Trading Act. You read the definition of a commodity, and my view is all it is 21st century gold. Or 21st century pork bellies. And it is that's why I'm here, by the way. She wanted me to say, because I've been arguing that it's a commodity for 3 years, and I thought it was obvious. Now the regulators, some of them are agreeing. The problem is that the financial regulators mostly don't agree, because if they agree that it's a commodity, then they can't regulate it. The Department of Financial Services doesn't have the authority to regulate commodities.
Well, I think, and let's move the conversation to the next step as well. But the Commodities Exchange Act, which regulates derivatives for the purposes of commodities for the purposes of derivatives regulation, has certainly implied that bitcoins are commodities, and the CFTC has brought it action. So that's not even controversial, and it can be a securities for securities law purposes, or at least issuing securities with bitcoins.
But I have a
and so
question for
forth.
you now with respect to that, about the derivatives and all that. What I find fascinating in the blockchain space with respect to the clever things you can do with blockchain is that as you declare the utilization of blockchain platforms to match and clear, again, instantaneously, totally disparate securities, totally disparate potentially futures contracts, don't you actually have a SEF? Isn't that potentially going to bring that level of commodities regulation onto you?
Yeah.
As well as the fact that really how do you get around acting as a true clearing agency if you are a SEF and you're using your own technology to clear these disparate financial instruments?
Yeah, so the question is, under derivatives law, there's an entity called the Swaps Execution Facility for Trading Derivatives, a SEF. And basically the law is that derivatives transactions have to be cleared in a clearinghouse and traded on these SEFs. But what blockchain technology, at least in principle, tries to enable is sort of the collapsing of the trading aspect and the clearing and settlement aspect in either securities or derivatives transactions. And so the broader question for regulators is, if we don't have these intermediaries to regulate, how exactly are we regulating transactions which kind of clear and settle in this distributed or decentralized manner? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't think regulators have answered that question, and a lot of people are looking at how these systems will finally clear and settle.
Yeah, it hasn't come up. I mean, it hasn't come up in any really good way yet. It's only a matter of time. But that's another thing that I find distressing when you read these like idiot arguments in articles out of like Wired saying, oh no, well, we really don't understand blockchain. We really shouldn't be regulating it. It's like, au contraire, if you work in our space, you most emphatically understand it. And it's really pretty clear how to regulate it if you have a truly identified goal in mind. Now, obviously, on our part, a large part here, a goal is the simple stuff, AML, OFAC, all those FinCEN concerns. But on a larger space, when you get into the highly complex blockchain use with SEFs and with clearing, is Dodd-Frank sought to address that clearing aspect because they wanted to make sure there was some sort of centralized, truly regulatory system to do these clearings that they understood and everybody could oversee. If it's done basically in-house, no matter how pure with mathematics, don't you think that's still something that should be regulated?
Well, I think one of the interesting things when we bring up the CFTC, Human actually was the star witness at the first hearings that the CFTC held, and they were run by then Commissioner, I don't know if he's still there, Wetchen. It was in 2014 or 15? 14. Commissioner Wetchen was enthusiastic, and in fact, one of the commissioners of the SEC, Kara Stein, was equally enthusiastic in comments made this past November or December in the potential for blockchain technology because of one really core component, which really would be one of my answers to you, that the thing that really fascinates me about it is this distributed ledger technology, whether in the context of Bitcoin, where a truly decentralized distributed ledger, or even a private ledger with more limited distribution, has a level of immutability to its record it is, a dream come true for the E&Ys of the world, because you have a system that, if applied, eliminates a single point, not of failure, but a single point of manipulation. Where if you have a distributed ledger and you are auditing things on that distributed ledger, you know the reality of what exists. And if you are in a closed system where everything is on the blockchain and all transactions must be on the blockchain, you have a complete and total universe with which to peruse for the entire transaction history. And it brings up one of the lines that was actually tweeted in 2014, and I don't recall by who, but I think I actually have it in a footnote in that primer, that the blockchain is the only place in the world where absence of evidence is truly evidence of absence. And that's a remarkable thing.
Wait, no. Because I see conspiracies at every turn. Remember, so long as, because that same control over the blockchain mining will apply. And you have to make sure, you got to prove that negative.
Well,
right, and the strength of your hash algorithm.
But the element of that, assuming that the hash algorithm hasn't been cracked or can't be cracked, and to date no one has put forth any argument that it has, the manipulation, manipulation of the mining process, or manipulation of nodes where you're walling off a user who sends a transaction to the network but it never clears, that does not allow you to manipulate the data added to the blockchain. It only allows you to prevent data from being added. And that's an important point, because you can't fraudulently publish data to the blockchain. You can only prevent transactions from occurring. So when we talk about what is a transaction in the Bitcoin ecosystem, the best practices from a user perspective are that a transaction has not occurred until it has been recorded for some time on the blockchain.
I guess
What
my
does that
fears.
take? How long? What kind of time period?
You can make it any time period.
If you're going with a 6 confirmation protocol, then you're looking at approximately an hour. And the average block time, you're correct. The average block time since 2013, when mining really took off, is about 8.5 minutes. The system is designed to reset about every 2 weeks, so that a block will, on average, be solved every 10 minutes. It can be solved as quick as a handful of seconds, or it can be solved as quick as, or slow as, like an hour and a half is the longest I've seen. But on average, it's about every 10 minutes. So if you're waiting for 6 confirmations, you're looking at about an hour. So is Bitcoin great for instantaneous payments? No, it's really not in most circumstances.
The fact that it's not instantaneous doesn't. Excuse me. The fact that it's not instantaneous is not a problem for me. As I said, that's the Ben Spock immediate gratification problem. The question that I keep coming up with, and I keep wanting, not just asking you, but everybody, is, this is great and the technology is great and it's got lots of great applications, but does it have to be anonymous? Is it inherently? No, of course not. Okay, so
it's also not really.
Well, the guy on the other side. Okay, tell me who got the 400 bitcoins that the hospital in LA paid 2 weeks ago.
Well, right now, based on only having his receiving address, you can't tell. The moment the bitcoins move, the anonymity shrinks.
You mean
And
the moment he spends them?
The moment he spends them or moves
obviously,
them.
the recipient at that point is going to know who he got them from.
And this is one of those rabbit holes where we might need another couple hours or some Excedrin. But the long and the short of it is there is means by statistical analysis or by the regulation of the choke points of the Bitcoin ecosystem, and that again is the exchanges, which are required under U.S. law and under many jurisdictions, soon to be as well the UK, and actually the entire Eurozone. All Bitcoin exchanges will have to have AML KYC policies. So when you have that, you have the unmasking. You have unintentional or intentional unmasking of Bitcoin addresses. Dread Pirate Roberts, the gentleman who ran Silk Road, unmasked himself allegedly. and unintentionally by tying his Bitcoin, a Bitcoin address he used to an address he used on a Tor message board. So there are ways, and in fact there have actually been at least 3 studies that I know of that have been published that addressed de-anonymization of the Bitcoin network through statistical analysis, and one which actually addressed being able to track IP addresses if you're managing a supernode, meaning you might not be able to tell where an IP address for a specific transaction is, but if you have enough connections out in the network, and if you are reasonably certain that you are receiving the first instance of a network transaction broadcast, you might be able to pinpoint someone's IP address.
Well, and that's what the regulations seek to do now for wallet providers and the like, is that, and even banks, for example, issuing SARs, when you're seeing utilization of monies that are for purchases of Bitcoins, and is there the idea that there's too much going into them for a certain purpose? We can assume that it might be bad, and therefore you're supposed to file a SAR. People now that provide wallets have to make sure that you've got the IP address registered. And that's all a way to take away the pseudonymity. But again, look, it still takes time.
And you mentioned it before, and Jennifer Shasky, the director of FinCEN, has said the same thing, that Bitcoin isn't nearly as anonymous as cash. And you mentioned cash as the true anonymous currency. Right,
but again, it still takes time.
Yeah.
And you can still money launder your Bitcoins. It's still going to have exactly the same type of commission, if you will, or discount taken by the market as exchanging your pesos. Used to be you took your pesos and you exchanged them for dollars, and the person making the exchange took their percentage off the top because he knew it might be hard to take those dollars and wash them. But this was before, of course, we had Colorado and allowed drug use and the administration telling banks to stand down and let all the cash flow in. So now it's a lot easier. But now what you could do is you could take your Bitcoins, buy those Kings tickets, and resell them on StubHub, and that's where the discount gets taken. Because the Kings take Bitcoins.
No, they don't.
Oh, they don't anymore? Oh, they used to. Okay, then overstock.com.
That clearly doesn't scale. I can go on Overstock and buy 3 carpets. It's not going to launder the $30 billion of drug money that flows through Mexico every year. So, let's put things in perspective, right?
I get to use examples that will make sense to most practitioners, and if I could put it in any other context and make it as equally clear, because a lot of people know who overstock.com is, then I'm going to do that. And I think we understand that that's the way, that it's proven way it has been.
You're implying that you can money launder through Overstock, which is silly.
I'm using that exactly.
It's not a right example. So it's
a quick and, if you will, dirty example, because people know who it is. All right? So
the reason why you can't money launder well with Bitcoins is that there aren't enough people who take them. If it is too difficult to convert $30 million worth of Bitcoins into $30 million worth of euros, or $30 million worth of dollars, or $30 million worth of any commodity that is exchangeable.
And that's actually one of the reasons which prevents Bitcoin from being anonymous, is that, and why a lot of these...
But that's a short-term answer, because so
you're saying you're bullish on the Bitcoin economy growing?
No. Well, if they don't listen, the answer to that question is, if it keeps growing, it will be easier to launder money with it. If it doesn't keep growing, then we don't care. We'll all go out and we'll have dinner afterwards. And this was a nice academic discussion regarding it was like Betamax.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go. How about the questions from the audience to see, maybe you're interested, you have a specific thing you're working on, you have a question about the regulations, maybe you have an exciting project you want to share with us in this space?
Has anybody ever spent a Bitcoin?
Yes, or do you have maybe you just have a question about what is your interest in Bitcoins?
Or how do you get a license?
Yes,
or
ma'am,
how would
you
do
raised your
something?
hand.
If Bitcoin is a commodity, why is so much, the coin is so expensive? It's not currency, it's not like gold coin. Why is it so expensive?
Well, what's the current spot market price of gold?
1,200.
I think it's more, but
It's around.
it was 1,200. Okay, so it came down a little. I remember when the spot market price of gold was $35 an ounce. That's when they decoupled it. It was about 70 70 was the market and 35 was the answer to your question is it's speculation.
No, but that's gold. This material in the coin is not the person.
Because my view is that, as I said before, Bitcoins are the 21st century equivalent of gold. They have value because people think that they have value. They're no different than currency. You know, why do you trust a little piece of paper that's printed with green ink and says Federal Reserve note? Because over time it's been used many times and people trust that it's going to be functional. The same is true with Bitcoins. Bitcoins have value because people believe they have value.
My point is that they could melt a coin and make jewelry out of it. They cannot make anything from these coins.
Well, I think that's what I said earlier. When we were talking about it earlier, I said Bitcoins are the 21st century version of gold. The only problem is you can't bang it out and make nice jewelry out of it. Yeah. You're right, but it's look at tulips in Holland in the 1600s, 1700s. I think it was 1720s, something like that.
You're only off one century. It's good. You're getting better.
What?
You're only off one century.
Which century was it?
It was 17th century, not 1720s. 1720s is 18th century. So 1720s would be the 18th century.
I didn't say so. What? Never mind. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it's
it
not
does matter.
important.
Like your words and meanings, right?
Tulips. The value of tulips in Holland went up dramatically. Did they change? They didn't change. They still generated flowers, but people were prepared to pay. The market value of anything is what people are prepared to pay for it.
Well, I think, but
the market value of Bitcoins is what people are prepared to pay for.
And that's absolutely true. One of the things that's often been asked is Bitcoin is waiting for its killer application. Well, if anything has been proven by the last 3 years, the killer application of Bitcoin, the first killer application of Bitcoin was speculation. And it's not even what people think Bitcoin's value is today. It's what people think Bitcoin's value will be in the future. But your question goes to the larger issue of, is there an intrinsic value to Bitcoin? And there's actually a decent amount of literature out there on this from both, actual academic commentators, like there's a person who's affiliated with Cato, used to be at the UGA, named George Selgin, who has a really nice paper on Bitcoin as a synthetic commodity money. There's a lot of stuff on the net, on Medium, and it's a question that really deals a lot with confirmation bias. If you have a interest in Bitcoin and a personal interest in Bitcoin, whether it's a stake or an interest in the economy or a job that it relates to it, you're probably more likely to see the benefits or the realities or the attractiveness, I should say, of the arguments that Bitcoin does have intrinsic value, which are based on some of what Jay just noted right now. It has value because people think it has value for a speculative purpose. It has certain abilities as a medium of exchange. It has certain abilities in a store of value, probably not from a US dollar perspective, but in certain other countries it has value. It has the ability to operate outside of capital controls, which will give it value in certain countries that impose strong capital controls. And in addition to that, there's this potential in the blockchain ecosystem, which we haven't really addressed, that Bitcoin may be the on-ramp onto these platforms, which are non-financial in nature, but rather in IT or record keeping or auditing or any of the other myriad ways that blockchain technology can be used. And if Bitcoin is a necessary token to access that on-ramp, it doesn't matter that you can't melt down Bitcoin and put it in a piece of jewelry. It doesn't matter that Bitcoin is not a good conductor of electricity like gold is, or that it's malleable. Because if those intrinsic value arguments play out, Bitcoin will have value. Now, if they don't, if you can't get over the fact that Bitcoin is incredibly difficult to use, it's incredibly difficult to secure unless you are a highly sophisticated user, or unless there are companies that develop applications that make it user-friendly, it may be that Bitcoin doesn't end up having real intrinsic value. So you're really
and how do you deal with its finite life? And if they don't have the hard fork, and we end up with the Bitcoin XL, and we end up with it stopping, where does that value go? That's my first question to you. And then the second thing is, what I find it difficult to get around is why Moore's Law doesn't apply, so that we still have that cap. And why can't it, at least the technology exist to mitigate the apparent hard reality of the end of all blockchains coming at what, 21 million?
Yeah.
And we're already at 15.2.
So it's 2140 when essentially all Bitcoins have been mined.
2140 is their outside date they gave, but since they're already 72% in play now.
It's a bell curve. So it's by design. It's not allegedly.
So
it will be in 2140. It's actually designed to create a lot of Bitcoin first, and then slows down.
If everything goes by the 10-minute average, but it's likely to not be the case, just as the halving date. So the halving date is going to be something, if any of you follow Bitcoin in the future, you're going to see a lot of talk about that over the next 4 months. It's when the reward to miners goes from 25 Bitcoins to 12.5 Bitcoins. And that happens, 12.5, it halves. So that happens every 210,000 blocks, or more or less every 4 years. But because mining has gone faster than the 10-minute average, it's really going to be more like 3.5 years, or 3 3/4 years. So it's moved up since the date I pushed out this version of the primer from July 17, which was maybe just a few weeks ago. It's moved up actually 4 days to July 13 is the new estimate of when this will occur. So what essentially, that's neither here nor there. The important thing is about every 4 years, the amount of new Bitcoins that enter the economy through the mining process gets halved. So it's going to go from about 36 to 4,000 Bitcoins a day to about 1,800 to 2,000 Bitcoins a day sometime in July, probably around mid-July. And that's going to occur again in 4 years, and again 4 years after that, and again 4 years after that. So there are concerns as to whether or not the mining process will continue to make economic sense, and how the economy will adjust to the shock that a lot of miners will be mining at a loss for some time when the halving occurs, and will have to shut off their machines. Now, there's separate elements of the scaling issue.
Right, and that's the hard fork. And also the other idea that's been posited is, yes, as opposed to a Bitcoin, you have a Mitcoin. But the problems with that is that the exchangeability of them, and that's what you were getting at, is that they just be exchangeable, looks to those same problems that have you ending with the 21 million.
But isn't the real answer to the halving and the losing money mining ignore improvements in technology? I mean, what's really going to happen is that so long as the computing speed increases at a rate faster than the return on Bitcoin transactions declines, in theory, the miners should continue to make the same amount of money for the same time investment.
I actually have done quite a bit of study into the economics of mining for a client who became interested in it, or actually a couple. And it's a little more complex than that. Essentially, the increase in technology, because you have to remember mining technology is uniquely specific to Bitcoin. It really can't be used for many other things other than maybe as a space heater. And so when you have this development of technology, and there's, if you go to the back of the primer, there's actually a glossary which provides some key terms. One of them is ASIC, which is application-specific integrated circuit, which is the chip that revolutionized Bitcoin mining and made it so efficient, or so much more efficient. And it actually took off at a parabolic rate of efficiency, both on an individual scale as well as on a network-wide scale, of the amount of computing power that could be exerted both on a general basis as well as on a power-efficient basis. And that, for several years, it actually trumped Moore's law. It was going at well more than double. And the reality is, though, that was also part of significant capital expenditure into the technology to make it more efficient, to make it more powerful. And miners in general, if you're a commercial miner, if it's you or me who are trying to buy a mining rig, we're going to be operating more or less at a zero margin, not much above a zero margin. Certain professional outfits that have access to cheap electricity and the proper climate conditions can operate at a significantly higher margin. But when the halving comes, you better believe that the margin is going to be disappearing for not necessarily all, but certainly most mining operations. The consequences, you swallow your pride and you turn off your machine unless it's really cold out and you need a little warmth.
So then, let's assume it halves this July, and it halves again, we'll keep it easy, 4 years from now. So in July of 2020, the return on a transaction is going to be 1/4 of what it is today.
Not accurate. The return of an individual exerting energy and computational power, and therefore in the cost they've invested in hardware, the cost they're investing in warehousing space, the cost they're investing in electricity, and the cost they are investing in air conditioning to keep their systems cool, will all be the same, but the amount of reward they're receiving for successfully
I agree. Yeah, I misused the term return. I mean, their gross revenue is going to drop by 25%. By
miners.
The miners' gross revenue is going to drop by 75%.
Yeah. The real world.
And if they elect, as you suggested, to just turn it off,
many miners likely will. What will happen then?
What's going to happen?
Yeah.
A lot of miners start.
Yeah. No. This absolutely has happened as systems have gotten more efficient. Consistently over the last 3 years, as we've moved from people mining with their Intel i5 chips to then using NVIDIA graphics chips to using ASICs, each iteration as it gets better, the older machines are less profitable, they're more expensive, and they slowly but surely get turned off. And the reality is the halving event is going to result in a lot more machines getting turned off over probably the coming 2 or 3 weeks.
But this is where you have the 51% Armageddon coming out, because then as you decrease the number of miners, then you come closer and closer to that happening. And again, even with more miners out there,
possibly, but not necessarily. The more immediate result is likely going to be the moment the machines start getting turned off. What's going to happen is, for a temporary basis that'll probably last about 2.5 to 3 weeks, transactions will probably be about 40% slower in being confirmed. And that's because the difficulty setting of the Bitcoin mining algorithm will be here, but enough machines will have been turned off, say it's 5-10%, that the power being exerted will mean the problems will be solved more slowly, and you'll have slower confirmation times until 2,100 blocks are solved and the equation resets itself.
I don't know.
Maybe
The current.
Too deep into the weeds.
Well, no, but it's also the current pie charts you see of the solving. You have the mining pools. Still is skewed so much to the larger pools.
Absolutely.
And I cannot help but think that that's just going to skew even more.
Well, one important note with that is, yes, a pool could potentially achieve 50%, and ghash.io was ghash, right? They, for a short period of, I think, 48 hours, solved more than half of the blocks that had been solved in a prior 40-hour period. They stood down because their economic incentives, particularly for people who have invested a lot of money in hardware and dollars into hardware to mine, to not break Bitcoin. It's not in their economic incentive. If you're looking for a weakness of Bitcoin, really it's a lot cheaper to break Bitcoin by flooding it with transactions and running into the problem we didn't get to, which was the hard fork and the idea of scaling Bitcoins on an individual block size basis.
I was trying.
But we don't have time for
raised
that.
it several times. I was trying to get us to the hard fork, but.
Okay, and certainly we can discuss these issues if you stick around, but I think we are more or less out of time for the formal part of our panel. So I would certainly like to thank everybody for being here, thank our panelists for our lively discussion, and whether or not you agree or disagree about the utility or the future of Bitcoin, I think we can all agree that's an exciting topic and that it is right now the 21st century. So thank you all for coming, and I'll be around. Thank you.